Let's also talk about the trade headlines that have been moving the futures this morning, as we showed you. Futures up sharply. Dow futures now implied open up by about 276 points.
Oh.
Eunice Yoon is in Beijing, and she's going to tell us about what the Chinese perspective is on this in just a moment. But we're going to start this morning with Kayla Tausche in Washington. She's been covering every twist and turn of this very convoluted story. Kayla, good morning.
Good morning, Becky. Negotiators will meet again this morning as they continue to work toward a mutual agreement on what to announce this afternoon when the vice premier meets with President Trump at 2:45 p.m. China made one portion of the agreement official. Its Security and Regulatory Commission announcing that starting next year, it would remove a requirement of partial Chinese ownership in financial firms that are foreign-owned. It's going to phase that in through 2020, and that's much quicker than China had originally proposed to be doing so. According to Myron Brilliant, the executive vice president of the Chamber of Commerce, the rest of the interim deal is expected to include an already completed currency pact and potential licenses for U.S. Huawei suppliers. Brilliant met with Liu He on Wednesday. He said the result would show progress, but it wouldn't necessarily be a grand slam. But President Trump yesterday seemed pleased.
We're doing very well. We're having another one tomorrow. I'm meeting with the Vice Premier over at the White House, and I think it's going really well. I will say, I think it's going really well. So we had a very, very good negotiation with China. They'll be speaking a little bit later, but they're basically wrapping it up, and we're going to see them tomorrow right here.
And President Trump and the vice premier have met on 3 of the vice premier's last 4 visits to Washington. And in those Oval Offices, Becky, there was usually a positive development, whether it was a purchase announcement of agricultural products, planning for a summit between President Trump and President Xi, or a delay of tariffs. So perhaps we could expect one or all of those things to be discussed today.
That's what I was thinking as you were saying it. October 15th is the date, just around the corner, when we had anticipated seeing additional or higher tariffs, 30% versus the 25% on many of those products right now. So if things are going to go positively, you would think that at the very least, would have to happen, not to mention potentially the idea of the 2 leaders sitting down together next month.
Yeah, Becky, I think you're right in saying the very least. You know, the reason why that date was chosen was not a coincidence. It was because it was expected to come right after this meeting and give them some low-hanging fruit to show that they can make progress. President Trump and President Xi are expected to both be attending the APEC summit in Chile on November 16th and 17th. And so this round, one of the reasons why there's so much pressure and so much focus on this round is because of the belief that if there was just enough room for agreement, that perhaps they could work for a few more weeks to get something more fully codified for the 2 leaders to sign.
Kayla, thank you. We'll check in with you a little later this morning as well. Kayla Tausche. Right now, for the reaction from China, let's get to Eunice Yoon in Beijing. And Eunice, it had been a lot of tough talk heading into this week, but what are you hearing at this point?
Well, the tone in the state media is much more upbeat than it has been in previous days. In fact, the state paper, the China Daily, ran a headline today that said, "Smiles seen on the first day." Now, one source familiar with the conversations in Washington, who's here, had told me some similar comments as you and Kayla were talking about, and that is that it looks as though the negotiators are moving towards not a deal, but de-escalation, that the tranche of tariffs that was supposed to kick in on October 15th, on next Tuesday, as well as the one in December, could very likely be suspended, that the Trump administration is expected now to grant American suppliers licenses that will allow the sale of certain components to the Chinese tech giant Huawei Technologies, even though that company is on a blacklist. And then in exchange, the Chinese would offer greater purchases of agricultural products, as well as potentially signing on to an agreement that would discourage more currency manipulation. So the business community here, especially people I've been talking to, have said that for the most part they would welcome this kind of deal because at the very least it lifts the uncertainty on their operations. And the idea would be to tackle some of the more bigger structural issues down the road. Now, the securities regulator, as Kayla had mentioned, did announce the timetable for greater access for foreign firms in the financial industry. So the timetable of that is that as of January 1st, futures companies would have the foreign limits scrapped. As of April 1st, that would apply to fund management companies, and December 1st for securities companies. So that reform was previously announced. And I think an important point here is that one of the criticisms for China is that they've been making a lot of incremental steps and announcements when it comes to the reforms. But at the end of the day, they haven't had to really push through a lot of these structural changes that the Trump administration, as well as the U.S. business community more broadly, have wanted to see. And it looks as though the way these conversations are going, they might not have to do it at the end of the day.